Hello everybody and welcome back to Bag C of our Tekno EB48 2.2 build series. This time we are going to be working on our front bulkhead. So as we're doing our normal organization here, I'll kind of go over what we're going to do in the video. So in the front bulkhead assembly, you're going to of course take your front differential. You're going to get your pinion gear mounted in your gearbox, mount your differential into the gearbox, and get the shock tower mounted, and I believe also the shock standoffs. So as you can see, not a whole lot of hardware in this bag compared to what we are going to see in the future of this build. This will be a pretty quick build. This guy is going to have on this car the same bearings in the front and back of the gearbox for the pinion gear. So you can see we throw those in, and then we're going to go ahead and mount the pinion gear inside the case. This shim is very important to remember. Do not forget it. That will go on the outside of the gearbox, as you can see there. And then we can go ahead and get our outdrive all mounted up onto our pinion gear. So we're going to take the set screw, which is going to use a 2.5 mil bit. We're gonna get some Loctite on that. You can see I put a little bit on the rag itself because just like I was saying in a previous video, sometimes there's extra oils or something that's just sitting right at the very top of that. So it's good to make sure that you don't get any of that weird watery or oily stuff when getting your Loctite ready to go. So we got Loctite on there and we got it mounted on. Like I've gone over in like a cleaning video before, make sure that there is as little play as possible between that outdrive and the pinion gear. You don't want that to be able to move back and forth, and definitely don't be afraid to crank down on that set screw. Now comes the fun part of getting the actual differential mounted into the gearbox. On face value, it is a very simple, straightforward process. But when you add in the super duper shims to make sure that your ring and pinion stay nice and tight, it can definitely get slightly annoying. So you can see I am struggling a little bit here to get that second shim in. It does call for 2 from the factory, and I was really determined to try and get the 2 in. And after struggling for a little bit here, you can see we go ahead and we speed up the footage, because this is, it's very important that when you're doing this to take your time, and I didn't want to make you guys sit and watch like 2 minutes or 3 minutes worth of me patiently trying to get the shim in. But it's very important to take your time, especially because these are so thin. It's very easy to crinkle the shim itself, and then once you crinkle it, it's kind of useless. So you use just a little bit of gentle persuasion to try and get it all mounted in there. Now in some cases, and what you're going to see here very shortly, is that sometimes that second shim just doesn't fit until after you actually get the car broken in. So I do, we're slowing down here. I do go ahead and take that second shim off, and I just mount it with the 1 shim in there, which, is good enough for the break-in. It wasn't super duper loose on the mesh. I would have liked it to be a tick tighter, but with a brand new gearbox, it is kind of difficult to get both the shims mounted in there. So we set that shim off to the side, and then I'll revisit that later after I do that break-in process. Now you can see we go ahead, get the case clamshells sealed together, and now we can go ahead and mount our front tower. I believe it is the same set of screws. They're all cap head, socket head screws to mount all of this stuff, so you don't have to worry about the different like sizes or lengths. They are all the exact same length for here to get the tower mounted and to get that gearbox closed up. So there are the 2, of course, that close the actual halves of the gearbox, and then there are 4 that go ahead and mount the tower. So just like in the last video, I'm sorry that the recording angle is not the most ideal, but you do get to see the car, of course, going together. Now that I got that finished up, I did another just final check just to make sure I was happy with the mesh that was inside there, make sure that the tower is sitting nice and flat, of which it was. And now we go ahead and mount our shock standoffs. So I get some Loctite on that screw, that way we don't have any loosening issues as we go around the track. And we'll do the exact same thing on this one. And here we're going to use the middle mounting hole For these, being that it is metal to metal, just like I said, you are gonna wanna make sure you use some Loctite, and definitely don't be afraid to give a good crank down on them, because obviously you don't want a shock just sporadically coming off as you're driving around the track. Now the final step here is to just get the little plastic, I don't even know if I really want to call it a cover because it is still open, but it's kind of a cover that sits underneath the differential. That is going to use the 2 smallest screws in there. There'll be 1.5 flatheads, very small screws. I don't like to use a drill on these because they can potentially strip out the case. So I'll do both of these guys by hand, get them snug in there. You definitely don't need to crank down. This isn't as much of a structural piece per se, whereas obviously like the tower, for example, you definitely want to make sure you get that all nice and tight. But that finishes up our bag. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.